start by just quickly introducing Advantage Learn, and then I'll introduce the two ladies that you can see on the screen, and we'll get going on our topic. So for those of you who have never interacted with Advantage Learn who are on the call today, just a brief introduction about us. We're a South African-based education company, and we are dedicated to unlocking potential through our innovative learning solutions for learners, schools, educators, and the like. We have a number of different offerings, including our exam and test preparation, school support programs, further studies programs, and what many of you might be familiar with is our Neo series, which is our growing range of high quality textbooks and digital resources. And the Neo series is really what powers these educator sessions. And so, yeah, without further ado, let me just introduce the session. So what we're aiming to tackle today is probably a topic that some of you, a couple of questions that some of you have maybe asked in terms of your classroom interactions with learners, which is how do we navigate learners who have anxiety towards specific subjects like maths and science. And I know what both Alison and Ashira have mentioned to me ahead of the call is that this really is a much deeper question than just maths and science. And I'm sure both of them will tackle that in their portion of the talk. As we go through the session, please do feel free to leave questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And also, I'm sure some of you might have specific examples of cases that you're dealing with in school that you might want to leave in the chat or the Q&A. If it is easier for you to raise your hand and ask a question, we will have a Q&A section at the end of the call, and I'll invite you to raise your hand. You can come on, share your question, and then we'll be able to answer those questions. For those of you concerned about recording, I know that the topic that we're discussing is sensitive in nature and we're talking about students. And so please do note that all of the specific sensitive information that's shared in the session will be stripped out of the recording before it is shared anywhere. So please do feel free to ask your specific questions. We really do want to be mindful of the learners and keeping everything as safe and sensitive as it possibly can be. So I just want to make sure that you are aware that we will handle that information very sensitively from our side. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two panelists. First, I just want to introduce Alison Lees. For those of you who noticed the Lees surname, you're not mistaken. Your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. Alison is our CEO, James Lees' wife. And so we're very excited to have her on the call today. She's a registered counselling psychologist with a master's degree in counselling psychology. Alison works and has worked with adolescents, parents, families, and the like, specifically in supporting them in typical life challenges that come up and specific challenges like anxiety, depression, trauma, relationship difficulties, and that sort of thing. So we're looking forward to her insights on the call. And then I also want to introduce Ashira Singh. Ashira is a psychiatric occupational therapist with over 7 years of experience in dealing with mental health and supporting individuals with mental health. She supports adolescents and adults in building resilience, managing their challenges, with a strong focus on understanding and addressing learning-related anxiety. So her insights are going to be incredibly valuable. So I'm going to ask you two ladies questions throughout the call that we've kind of come up with. But as I mentioned before, please do leave your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear your specific questions so we can make sure that the session is as helpful and valuable to you as possible. So Ali, I'm going to start with you. And my first question for you is, what are some of the most common root causes of maths and science anxiety that teachers will face or experience in their learners?
Thanks, Michaela, and thank you for having me. So I think it might be helpful to just have a look at anxiety in general and just have a look at, so that everybody's on the same page, what anxiety is all about. And then we can look a bit more specifically into anxiety that might present in response to maths and science. So I think that, When I often ask people about anxiety, when I work with patients especially, they often say things like, well, anxiety is worry. If someone's anxious about something, they're worried about something, which is kind of, a premise that somebody's nervous about something. So in a lot of people's minds, they think that anxiety is fear. And I think that sometimes can be true, but I think it's helpful to know that anxiety is a secondary experience, and that underneath that experience can be fear, but it can also be a whole host of emotions. It could be anger, for instance, or sadness. And I think that it's helpful to know that, when an emotion comes up, an emotion is a normal human experience. We are designed to experience emotions. And in an ideal world, when an emotion comes up, we should be able to regulate ourselves, which is that we should be able to calm ourselves down so that we don't experience that emotion so severely. But anxiety comes up for us when we experience an emotion, and it's not only fear, it can be any emotion, as I say. When we experience that emotion, anxiety will come up when that emotion gets out of control, when it gets out of hand, or it amplifies severely. So I often use the example with patients of being on an airplane. And you can imagine being in an airplane as a human who can't fly. You're entirely reliant on this sort of piece of machinery to get you to the destination that you need to go to. And more than that, you're reliant on this captain who is flying the airplane to get you there. And so let's say, for instance, you're in mid-flight, you're way up high in the sky, and you experience turbulence. And you can imagine that your initial response, very appropriately, would be fear. The emotion fear would come up for you. And in an ideal world, in that scenario, you would have the pilot come onto the radio and to tell everybody, sorry about that, folks, we're just experiencing a little bit of anxiety, not anxiety, we're experiencing a little bit of turbulence, and everything's fine, we're all safe, we'll get there safely. And what that would do is that would just calm your fear down so that your fear ideally would go away. And that is a really great example of what regulation can look like. So in that instance, this pilot or this captain regulating you would really just keep your fear at bay. If, for instance, in that same scenario, on the flight, you experience turbulence and your fear comes up and the pilot does nothing, right? Your fear can quickly start to escalate. Oh my gosh, where's the pilot? Has the pilot died? What's happening? Are we all going to die? Are we safe? And from there, we start to see anxiety. Okay, so I think, what's helpful to know about anxiety is that it's not necessarily a sort of organic emotion. It's an experience that happens to us when we don't feel safe feeling the emotion that we feel, and when we don't have the capacity to regulate ourselves or calm ourselves down when we're experiencing an emotion. And so if we think about the emotions that can exist underneath that anxiety or that can cause anxiety, when I think about a learner being in a maths or a science class, for instance, I imagine that two of the sort of prominent emotions that they could be experiencing are anger or frustration and fear. And I'm sure there's, a number of other emotions that could come up, but I think just for simplicity's sake and for the time constraints that we have, I can just focus on that. And if we have a look at, what a person could be nervous of or scared about in maths, there are so many different things. And when we look at how an emotion would come up, it comes up in response to predominantly two things. One is the immediate environment that we find ourselves in. And so a learner might be, activated by something in the immediate environment. For example, a teacher's comment, a mark that they receive, a comment from a peer, a sum that they don't know what to do with, and that can immediately activate fear for them. Another sort of environmental context that could activate fear or anger even is in the internal world. And that would be any kind of narrative that they might have about what's going on. And so that could be something like maths is so hard, or I always fail at maths, or something like that, that could activate frustration or could activate fear, which then in turn can, if they don't have an ability to regulate themselves or a way of calming themselves down, that is what can lead to anxiety. And I think, I think maybe I'll leave it there and leave room for others.
No, it's super helpful. Thank you, Ali. That I think the context is really important and significant because, as you said, framing anxiety to be exactly what it is helpful. Otherwise, you start to view it as fear or something related. I know you've just spoken about internal and external environmental triggers. So Ash, just a question for you. What are some practical coping strategies that learners can use in the moment when they're experiencing that anxiety due to those internal and external environmental triggers?
I think when we think about in the moment, moments are going to be different. Sometimes it's going to be in an exam situation. Sometimes it's going to be in a classroom situation. Those two are very different. In terms of the classroom situation, there's more leeway to kind of stop. There's more leeway to kind of be supported. In an exam situation, there's a lot more pressure to keep kind of going. So thinking about this, I think I'll answer kind of overall, and then we can try and see which one would go where. The first thing I thought about when you asked that question is kind of, I think it sounds quite simple and mundane, but breathing exercises. Something like, and breathing exercises, I think they are not always seen for what they can do. It's simple like, oh, everybody kind of breathes, so what about it? But it can actually do so much to help you regulate. It can actually do so much because if you think of it, when you are feeling anxious, basically kind of what is happening in the body is it's this heightened energy, these heightened feelings. You might feel like your heart is racing. I like to explain it using like your fight or flight hormone. So there's adrenaline running in your body and you're feeling like you need to be prepared for a threat. So what happens is that the adrenaline releases, my heart rate is going up because my muscles need to be prepared for whatever I need to be prepared for. My digestion is shutting down. I'm feeling hot, I'm sweaty. And that's all because the body is getting ready to respond. Whereas actually we're in a situation where physically I don't have to respond. And something like breathing is going to slow it down. It's going to slow the heart rate down. It's going to regulate the blood pressure, and also help with thinking a little bit more clearly. So it's that moment to kind of pause. I think the breathing exercises can be used in a classroom situation, and it can be used in an exam or test situation as well, where there's a little bit more pressure. The other thing I was thinking, so when we spoke about being able to regulate your emotions, there are some external things that we can use to regulate. And one of the skills that we do, we call it a distress tolerance skill. So when I'm under distress and I cannot deal with the distress right now, I can't go into processing the anxiety. I need to be able to function. I need to be able to kind of carry on. So I need to tolerate the distress. And one of those skills that I really enjoy is called the self-soothing with we say 6 senses. But the 6 senses is basically your sense of movement and where you are in space. So I can use my vision, I can use my hearing, I can use my smell, my touch, my movement or taste to regulate myself and to make me feel that I'm in a safe space. Because when I think so, your senses, they do play a role in input and telling you whether you are safe or not. So if I am in a space where people look really angry, so I can see that they look really angry, they sound really angry, I'm hearing, and that immediately is going to put up a response of like, okay, guard yourself. So we can use our senses. So knowing that I'm not under threat, I'm okay, I can tolerate the distress. Let's give input that regulates. For example, it could be something cool that I do with my patients is a little scent bag. So the scent bag has a little bit of salt you take a little square of material, tiny square of material. You put a little salt in it, and you put 2 to 3 drops of an essential oil that you like. It doesn't matter which one it is. And that is something that has helped some of my patients with their anxiety. I specifically had one, it's a little different. It was social anxiety. And this patient had to go out and kind of like exposure therapy, like go out and actually practically do the thing that you're anxious about to create positive experiences. And he would use this little scent bag beforehand to kind of do some breathing exercises, and that would help feel more regulated. So one of the self-soothing with your 6 senses is really helpful. If you think of movement, the movement sense, we usually say linear movement is quite like destimulating, whereas your circular movement is quite stimulating. So if they are feeling overly stimulated, linear movement can help quite a lot. If it's something as simple as rocking side to side, it's something as simple as stretching, that might be a good one. I know sometimes like a scent bag is not always going to do so well in a test or exam situation, or it could be used in the classroom. Yeah, so there's different, looking at how can we use the senses, with each student, it's going to be different as well. I know I respond really well to like smell and sound, but somebody else might really respond well to touch and vision or something like that. And then I think one more thing that I was thinking is your coping statements. So when it comes to feeling anxious in the moment, there's thoughts that are going through your mind that are feeding that anxiety. Thoughts that I think, like Ali was saying, things like, this is really hard, I'm not good at this is really frustrating, I'm about to fail this exam, and teaching them how to catch those thoughts and kind of move away and cope with them. Like, I'm going to try my best. And if that's all I can do, that's okay. If I breathe, I'm going to feel calmer. If I'm calmer, I will think better. So helping them kind of memorize statements that they can use in the moment. Stop, take a breath, use a statement. Yeah. So I think in the moment, practical help would be some of those things.
That's
And
yeah, go for it, Ali, go.
Those are such lovely ideas, Ash, and I think if I can, I'd love to just sort of add to what I originally said, which will really sort of bring Ash's stuff to light. I think that, you know, often it's helpful to sort of understand how the brain works, by sort of learning about what we call the hand-brain model. And if I can I just sort of explain it very briefly? Thanks. Okay, so if we think about our brain, we can almost have quite a rudimentary understanding of it by having a look at our hand. And I think if I can ask all the attendees to almost do this with me, I can't see you, but I'll just trust that you're doing it. So if you hold your hand up like this, and you would fold your thumb in and then cover your thumb with your 4 fingers, we would then be creating almost like a little model of your brain, so that your brain would almost be like sitting in your skull like this. This protruding part would be sitting behind your forehead here. And this wrist we can look at, or rather this fist. But if we have a look at the wrist over here, this would sort of represent the brain stem, which would be the part of your brain that would then be going down into your spinal column. And this brain stem, very basically, sort of the function that comes from that is kind of your arousal. So very sort of rudimentary human functioning. Are you awake or are you sleeping? Then if we have a look at the outer layer part of your brain, this is called your cerebral cortex. And this is what we call the thinking part of your brain. And this is where the very complex human sort of experience comes from. And this cerebral cortex, or the thinking part of your brain, is responsible for very higher order functioning. This is the part of your brain that you use for logical reasoning. It's the part of your brain that can synchronize activity. It's where you can strategize from. And more importantly, it's the part of your brain where you are able to regulate yourself. Okay, then if we were to sort of peel back that cerebral cortex and we were to look underneath, we would be looking at the sort of more core part of your brain. And this we can call the feeling part of your brain. And this is the part of your brain that's responsible for your emotions, and it's responsible for your impulses. And within this feeling part of your brain is a little part of the brain that we'll represent with the thumb called your amygdala. And this is the part of your brain that is called the alarm system in your brain. So when you have an emotion that comes up, which is in this part of your brain, if the cerebral cortex, or if the outer layer of your brain is failing to regulate that emotion, the amygdala starts firing more and more, and it starts kind of telling your brain that you're really in trouble, right? And you start getting activated more and more. And so what it's trying to do is it's trying to urge your brain to function on instinct, or to function in that fight-flight mode, right? Which is to just attack or run away. And in order to do that, your brain is designed quite cleverly in that this part of your brain, the cerebral cortex, turns off, right? So no neurons in this part of the brain are firing. We say that this part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, or the thinking part of your brain, goes offline. And that's so that you aren't able to sort of reason through things. You need to just make decisions quickly, right? And based on instinct. So when your anxiety gets activated, the cerebral cortex goes offline. And now you are basically losing that ability to regulate yourself. And more than that, you're also losing the ability to think clearly through things, which is exactly what you need when you're trying to do maths and science. And so it's essential to get this thinking brain, the cerebral cortex, back online to both regulate and calm down that emotion, but also to be able to think clearly through the sums that you're trying to do, or through whatever you're trying to function in. And that's exactly what Ash was sharing about, these lovely strategies to get that cerebral cortex back online, to get this part of your brain functioning again so that it can calm you down. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think also just loving how your two answers are relating to each other, because it's all about, you know, these internal and external factors that affect your brain. And then it's how can we practically adjust the internal and external factors that our brain's experiencing to regulate our emotions and calm down. It's so, yeah, so helpful to know. Ali, just an additional question for you then. I think we all recognize that this anxiety towards maths and science triggers much earlier on, typically. So how do early classroom experiences like feedback or repeated failure or comments from a teacher, how do those things shape long-term anxiety around maths, and how does that affect the student?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's, you know, it does make a huge impact. And I think, you know, our brains only fully develop when we're 25 years old. And so the whole time that we are a child, especially in those formative years, our brains are developing hugely. And so we are almost like programming our brains with experiences that we have. And so let's say, for instance, a child is in a class and their teacher is consistently punitive or consistently berating of them, that is going to get programmed into a child's brain while they are developing, so that when they are older, it's almost like the program just plays out. And so, you know, problematic experiences that can really inform a child's brain to sort of become anxious or to experience fear or anger can be things like unsafe classroom dynamics. And I say that quite broadly, but, you know, sort of what I mean by that is, I guess, a child feeling not really safe to just learn. So it could be a teacher who's maybe quite harsh, or it could be a narrative around the content, that the content is very scary or difficult. It could be a teacher's response to how the child learns. Yeah, I think that's that's, you know, that's part of the picture. I think that that there's also a huge responsibility on the parents of the children, or the guardians or caregivers that the child has, and their narrative as well, around math, science, the child's learning in general, the child's intelligence. Yeah, so I think, you know, as educators especially, it's helpful to know that a child, that cerebral cortex, which is, you know, if that's activated, then the child can learn. And that's only going to be activated if the child feels safe. And you know, one of the best ways for a child to feel safe is to have them feel almost sort of playful. And obviously I'm especially thinking of the younger years here. But yeah, to almost take that, the sort of very seriousness or the pressure off children, to help them to feel safe so that they can sort of engage with their thinking brains.
I think I wanted to just add to that. Yeah, just coming off what Ali was saying in terms of maths and science, there's a lot of importance that is placed on it. And I think it can become very, very overwhelming because there's already this kind of expectation that, like, or this this view that if you're smart, like maths and science are the two things that make you smart. And if you can't do that, like, you know, are you really smart? Or yeah, and I think those are two, and especially like with maths and stuff, it's a lot of overwhelm. It's a lot of overwhelm before the content is even worked with. And I think it will come up a little bit later as well, but you know, not everyone is good at maths or science. Some people excel in things like languages. Our brains work differently, but I think there's a lot of emphasis that is placed on maths and science, and I think there's a lot of, I think, understanding the different influences to the anxiety is really important as well. I mean, I think there's like cultural influences as well, that you're expected to do well at maths and science, or you're failing basically, no matter if you're doing great in certain other things. Yeah, so I think just being very, very intentional and understanding that there are so many factors that are contributing to the child. And if I'm anxious even before I get to the content, I'm not going to be able to take in that content. I'm not going to be able to think very clearly.
That's so valuable. Yeah, very, very helpful context and information. So, Ashira, with that in mind, how would you recommend that teachers structure their classroom environment to reduce some of those external factors, or even just support kind of changing the internal narrative, and how that can maybe help students feel like they can approach maths and science in a more healthy kind of mental state?
Yeah, I think we spoke about just like a lot more of a gentle approach, knowing that there's a lot of anxiety around maths and science, knowing that there's a lot of importance placed around maths and science. One of the things I am thinking is, when we spoke about anxiety, it's sort of the state of being overstimulated. And I think very practically at a structural level, I'm thinking of making sure that the classroom itself is not overstimulating, that it is a space where you know, it adequately. I think I'm thinking of, so my mom is a teacher, and if I walk into her classroom, there are just charts and colors and drawings everywhere. And I think I went into her grade 1 classroom. I can't remember what her classroom looks like now, but I just thought I walk in there and there's just so much going on. And I think the intention sometimes is, it's supportive. It is to support visual, and then I see and I learn, which is great. But I think if you're going to have way too much going on, you're going to lose them. So I think, like, really thinking about what's necessary to put up, or what's necessary to put where, for, like, yeah, and resources that could be used, like little things that are stuck on tables instead of up on walls and things like that. So structuring it so that there are helpful resources in each corner, but not overwhelming, overstimulating, like I'm seeing too many things and I can't find what I'm looking for. And then the other thing I think is that it can be quite daunting, especially with the younger kids, to do these things alone as well. And I think I thought that maybe a little bit of group work could be really good. I mean, and then it's working on more than just understanding the content, but it's also working on those group work dynamics and those interpersonal skills. Like you're fostering actually more than the content itself. But that also brings them, they're together in it. I'm not there sitting alone, frustrated, while I think my classmate is flying through the answers or something. Like I have a bit of support. You can slow it down, discuss it, really get to understanding it instead of trying to like just get through it. So I think, yeah, gentle, slower. I know sometimes there's a lot of content to get through. And I think that can make it quite hard as well, in terms of like there's a time limit and we have to get it done. But for these kids to understand, they really, really just need to be slowed down, really just need to be supported. And yeah, I think something like that might be helpful.
I think as well. Oh, sorry, Michaela.
Go for it, Ali. No, please go for it.
I think, also, and again, I'm so conscious of sort of like sitting in an ivory tower telling teachers, be psychologists, all of you, or like be therapists for the children. We get it that you've got a syllabus to get through. And I imagine especially like grade 10, 11, 12, it becomes near impossible to try and manage that as well as the kids' anxiety and that sort of thing. But I think that, when you do notice that there's a kid in the class who is presenting with anxiety, that you can maybe just ask them to stay back after a lesson and just help them to almost identify that maybe they are struggling with anxiety, and then to sort of help them through tending to that. So whether that's asking them to just write about what they're feeling, or to go and to teaching them about breath work, or in this day and age, technology is available to children. Go onto ChatGPT and ask how to manage anxiety in real time, or refer them to a counselor, or something along those lines. But I think that you don't have to necessarily be a counselor or a therapist yourself. I can only imagine the anxiety that thought brings on for you as a teacher and an educator. But yeah, just being able to almost help the child identify that they are anxious, and then recommending that they do something about it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So I think with that in mind, a lot of teachers will be sitting on the call wondering, how do I navigate, or how do I kind of balance the workload that has to kind of come through the classroom and all the topics I have to cover versus a student's anxiety. So Alison, how can teachers practically identify if a student is struggling with anxiety, or whether their struggles are content related, they're questioning and they're lacking understanding of what they're kind of taking in the classroom?
So that's, it's quite a tough thing to identify that, because often, anxiety results in learners sort of freezing, or yeah, the brain going offline. And so you can't always identify. It's not obvious. It's not kind of like, the child acting out, which becomes very obvious. So I imagine that it can be quite easy to miss. But I think, if you know that a learner is capable of doing whatever, maths or science, or has the skills, but especially under like a pressurized environment, so in an exam or a test, they're not delivering, then that's quite indicative that there's anxiety going on. In other words, in that high pressurized environment, their thinking brain's going offline, they're not functioning at their proper capacity. Another thing is if they sort of fall to pieces in class, so they might sort of collapse, or emotionally, that is, sort of shed a tear or two or whatever. And again, that they consistently have the skills, but that something is preventing them from doing that, then, there's a strong chance that anxiety is behind that. Whereas if you know that they have like consistently had gaps in their knowledge, then that might be more sort of gaps in content than anxiety driven.
That's very helpful. Because I'm sure a lot of teachers are sitting here and just kind of grappling with those two worlds of, they need to teach, but then how do they kind of navigate that side of things? So Ash, just a question for you. How would you suggest that the teachers on the call navigate conversations with students' parents in terms of recommendations to the parents on dealing with their child's anxiety? How can the teachers advise parents in that way?
Yeah, there's always a bit of a difficult one here. But I think, off the top of my head, I'm thinking that your concrete kind of facts and logic have to come in here, in terms of really noticing what the child is presenting with in the classroom or in their tests and exams, and kind of getting all of those things together, to kind of say, okay, this is what I'm noticing happening in the classroom. This is what is coming out in their grades. Maybe even having a chat with the child, depending, obviously, the child, in terms of what age group they're in, they're going to have different insight into what they're feeling. But with a younger child, maybe asking, what are you feeling? What's going on? Like putting it into words for them, like what's happening in your body. Older kids are hopefully going to be able to tell you a little bit more, but they also are they're actually learning how to name their emotions at that point, in any case. But maybe having covered all of those things, and then saying to the parents, hey, these are the things I'm seeing in the classroom. These are the things that we're seeing in their grades. This is what's happening when I'm speaking to them. Have you noticed anything with them? And then from there, seeing if you can open up that conversation and say, like, okay, maybe they are struggling with anxiety. What is the way forward? Can we work on a way forward together? And I think really inviting them into the conversation as well. Like, what are you seeing at home? What's happening at home? Is there anything that we need to, or how can we support better? But just coming from a supportive kind of perspective, rather than you need to take your child and get something done about it. I don't think those go so well. Especially if parents are quite tender about those things.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think teachers have the fun job of having to navigate the parents' emotions and the students' emotions and everything in between. So just we feel for the world that you stuck between, the two worlds that you stuck between, and hopefully the session is useful in that regard. I want to open the floor now just to see whether anyone wanted to raise their hand, because you have a specific question. I have a bunch more questions sitting here, but I do want to allow you to talk if you had a specific case in your classroom that you're dealing with and you'd like to be unmuted. We've got a message in the chat from Sandra. Sandra says, all good, thank you. I think that the general advice about how to assist learners feeling this level of anxiety has been very useful. Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. That's great feedback. See that Bandile also has a question. So Bandile, I'm gonna allow you to talk. Ali, sorry, were you gonna say something? Go for it.
I was just going to try and guide Elizabeth and possibly Bandile, to say that I wonder if your little microphone icon that you need to click on is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. That's where it is for me. So that might be where to look for you.
Elizabeth, she pressed the hand thing by mistake.
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yes, Bandile, we can hear you very softly, but yes, we can hear you.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm Kujo. We are attending on the same computer. We are at work. So I just wanted to ask, will we be able to get the recording?
Yes, you will be getting the recording of the session, so you can revise anything that was mentioned and also share it with your department if that's useful, or to other educators.
Okay, thank you so much.
Perfect, no problem. Okay, no problem. I don't see any additional hands raised. Does anyone else have a question that you'd like to specifically ask? Let's see. I'll give it a second because I know that often someone's frantically typing a question. But in the interim, Ali, I had a question for you that I'll just ask. Is math anxiety more about a fear of failure, a lack of confidence, or is it something deeper from the student side? What do you typically find?
Yeah, I think it can really depend, and I think it's quite multi-layered. So I think it can be all of what you've just said. It really is so unique on everybody, on each individual. Depending on the person's sort of life experience, the experience of being in the classroom, their own personality, their sensory profile, it's all also multi-layered, I guess. So yeah, it can definitely be a combination of all of those things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I see we have some questions. So Corne would like to know, and I think this is such a valuable question. We can't discount that teachers have emotions too, and you're navigating your own potential anxiety. So Corne would like to know, what can we as educators do to prevent our anxiety to influence the learners? So Ashira, or Ali, come in with, whoever has an answer to that question, go for it.
I would think so, similar strategies to what we had mentioned for the kids. I think with the kids, with the learners, I know I specifically focused on in the moment in the classroom or in a test and exam situation. But I think when it comes to anxiety as an adult, I do think that I would like to understand, like, what is this anxiety about, or where is it coming from? But I think this is for you as a person to sit down with someone and maybe sit down for yourself and journal about it and reflect about it. Or this is something that if you really don't know where it's coming from, a psychologist is a very helpful person to, and Ali can add in here to kind of process what is going on and why there's this anxiety. But when it comes from the strategies point of view, it's very similar things to managing that. Your soothing mechanisms, you're like looking at the thoughts that are coming up when you are feeling anxious. I don't know if that helps a little bit. Maybe Ali, you can you can add in there.
Yeah, I think you're so spot on, Ash. I sort of really agree with what you're saying. And I think, if you were sort of a patient of mine, we would definitely look at what's underneath that anxiety and have a look at what are the emotions that are really driving that, and how we could try and regulate those emotions. So, is there a fear of failure on your part, for instance, as an educator, or is there sort of fear of not getting through the syllabus? Is there fear of not being a good enough educator? Those are just for examples. But, without having to sort of go into that now, I think, as Ash has said, using strategies to try and regulate yourself so that you are able to help regulate the learners in your class is essential. And those are things like, as Ash has said, sort of breathing exercises. And, maybe we can get quite specific around that. And these are things that are readily available on the internet, for instance. You could easily Google breathwork techniques to help with anxiety. There are things like the box style breathing. and a whole host of others. But, those are things that you can access very easily online. There are YouTube videos that can help you to learn how to breathe effectively. And as Ash said, it seems ridiculous that we're telling you to breathe. You do that every day, but it's a very specific type of breath work that can just help bring that thinking part of your brain back online, that can just regulate your nervous system. So breath work is helpful.
Sorry, carry on.
Go for it.
I just had a thought of thinking, I'm thinking that like we also, kids are learning how to regulate themselves. They're learning, they need a lot of external regulation as well. And they might feel a lot in the moment. But for me, I'm thinking from my perspective, if I was feeling anxious or I knew I dealt with anxiety, I would have to think about what is leaving me vulnerable to that anxiety as well, and put in strategies in my daily life to make sure I'm managing, just managing my emotions. So it could also be a thing of like in your daily routine, what is that looking like? Are you feeling very balanced? Are you not feeling very balanced? Are there strategies that you, something we do is like relaxation therapy, that it teaches you how to kind of slow down, or visualizations that teach you how to kind of distract and slow down either in the moment, or you're doing kind of like making sure your baseline is okay, or your foundations are okay, so that you're not left vulnerable when a child is feeling anxious, that it now impacts on you, or you're feeling anxious in a situation and it impacts on the classroom. But yeah, regulation, it shouldn't just be a thing of like, in the moment I'm feeling this, now we gotta put in place strategies. It should be like a daily kind of ongoing thing of regulating yourself to make sure that you're not vulnerable, I think.
And I think
Sorry, can I add one extra layer, Ali, before you speak? So Corne's actually responded to add some additional context. From an educator's perspective, specifically when dealing with parents or interacting with parents, there's often bullying that kind of comes is directed at the educator. Parents that are unsupportive when they're made aware of their child not doing homework or their child misbehaving in a classroom setting and that sort of thing. And this is what's creating an anxiousness for the educators, is actually the interactions and engagements with the parents. I don't know if that maybe changes anyone's answer, or if there's anything additional to add with that context.
I think, I mean, it just sounds like the way that Corne has written this, I'm just reading it again, is she's sounding quite vulnerable, which is quite sad and indicative that maybe there's not enough sort of systemic support for educators. So I'm kind of thinking, are you as an educator sort of on your own and broaching parents? Is it helpful to get in almost sort of more educators, or where's the head of department or the principal, to just give you that additional layer of security, especially if there's quite a bullying dynamic? That, what we're wanting is for you to feel as safe as you can and as regulated as you can, so that you can do what you need to do. And so if there is that vulnerability, then there's, something practical would maybe be to have physical support by another educator, or by ideally, a principal or a sort of head of department maybe, to just help alleviate that sort of uneven power dynamic maybe.
I think thinking of this as well, and maybe you're going to see my therapist brain really come out because I'm thinking of when my patients as well. Like we Ali might agree that we do get some patients who they're really struggling. They might be quite aggressive. They will go off at you for multiple different reasons. They will project on you, and I think for personally, strategies to deal with that is it's like kind of like mental boundaries. I can only do so much in this space. You are not the parent. And the parent does have to take quite a lot of responsibility for what is going on. I know it's easier said than done, but I think kind of like a mental kind of like
Force field.
fortress or like, yes, like a boundary to say like, okay, this parent is coming at me and putting the blame on me instead for what their child is doing. But you see their child for what, 5 hours or maybe not even. And the rest of the time they're at home. The rest of the time they're in their environment under their care. They have a bigger influence. And I think not internalizing it and saying that the reason the child is not doing well is because, yeah, I think also, but, you know, obviously reflecting and saying, am I doing everything that I can? Is there anything else I can do? But not internalizing the blame for these things. And I think naturally, there will be people who come at you. Naturally, there will be parents who come at you. It is a given. But in that moment, acknowledging what you feel as well, acknowledging that that's hard for someone to come at you. Like say, for example, if I had a patient like who's really distressed and they start shouting at me for a reason that I'm not like not 100% part of, like you feel it and it's okay to feel it and to acknowledge it, but not to internalize and say, now it is my fault. I don't know if that is helpful, maybe.
So helpful. We have loads of questions coming in, so I do want to move on to the next question. So I have a joint question. There were two that came in. One from Elizabeth. Elizabeth would like to know, how would you suggest one deals with a learner who comes into a test and completely falls apart, crying, battling to breathe, etc. And then a linked question to that is from Jill, who would like to know, what can we as teachers do before a test or exam to help students relax so that the cerebral part of their brain can turn back online? Sorry, Ali, you're going to say something, so I'll hand to you, and I'm sure Ashira.
It was just a follow on from the previous topic, but it's absolutely fine. Ash, do you want to take this one, the practical ideas of calming down?
Yeah, I can. I think my first thought is like, oh my word, these teachers are taking on a lot of responsibility, which is great. Like I love the kind of intentionality with these questions. So just well done for that. But I think, yeah, a child completely falling apart, crying, battling to breathe, we can help regulate them, but there is only so much you can do before you have to call for help. We have to send them to someone for counseling. We have to maybe call the parents to send them, like if they are having a panic attack, if there's someone who can help with that. But I don't think it's 100% your responsibility to regulate. You can help guide them through some breathing exercises. I am also thinking, so there's another skill that I'm thinking of where if it's really intense emotions, it's both for adults and for the kids. But if there's intense emotions, grounding skills, and then there's one, we call it the TIP skill, and it stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, paired muscle relaxation. And I'm specifically thinking of the temperature. So when they're getting really heightened, doing something to tip the temperature, it's based on like your dive reflex and stuff, and it's that it's where you dunk your head into a bucket of ice. But we obviously are not going to do that. But something they could do is maybe the help the kid like direct through breathing exercises, cold water on your face, sit aside for a little bit, sit with them, if possible, because I think like coming into a test, you've got responsibility to make sure that you're invigilating the test. This is where like assistance or something would really be helpful. I think, what was that second part to the question?
Yeah, sorry, I'll read because they're very much related. So the first question was, how would you suggest one deals with a learner who comes into a test and completely falls apart, crying, battling to breathe, etc. So I suppose that's more on an individual level, whereas Jill's question was more broad. You know, how do you prepare your students
for the test or exam? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could do something fun to alleviate anxiety just before the test or exam, little icebreaker, something to just to make it fun, make them laugh. Even if it is something like directing them through breathing exercises, even if it is asking them a funny question or quickly playing a funny game. Yeah, something like checking in with them, but making it nice and light before they start the test or exam. I think laughter is such a powerful one. Actually, like, yeah, having that positive emotion. Mm-hmm.
I think you could also, if you have the resources to do something like this, to sort of play a guided meditation that will just utilize maybe some progressive relaxation or whatever. There's things that are freely available online again, or if you do make use of an app that you listen to music on, like Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube Music, all of them have hordes and hordes of content, like guided meditations or relaxation exercises. And then, that question about the learner who falls to pieces in a test, I think if you don't have the capacity to tend to her yourself because you are managing the rest of the class, to ask that learner to just go and splash her face with cold water, and just to take some deep breaths and just to get moving. And then, there's another strategy as well where you can, pretend you're pushing down a wall or to do some push-ups. It's all just attempts to try and get that thinking brain back online, and then do for her or him to return to the test.
Yeah,
that's very helpful. We have a lot of comments from the teachers. So Sharisha says it's rather complex when you're a high school teacher and you have a student who's anxious. Parents have to work together with the teacher and the learner to help them overcome anxiety. Sometimes learners are very anxious and they fear maths or science, but they're still pushed or forced to do the subject, and they're still expected to achieve high marks. So just kind of a comment around navigating that. Roshan said, I've not researched this, but from my observations, there's a lot of anxiety, and a lot of the anxiety, comes off the actual content itself. For example, not knowing the concept of height. So it's also helpful for the educator to clarify some of those basic concepts in a maths lesson before continuing to the more challenging topics, I think is what Rishan's suggesting there, which I think is a great point. I think often, especially in maths, subjects that are very fast paced, there's a lot going on and there's a lot of pressure to rush through the content, and maybe the foundations are not there, and helping students to really grasp the foundations can alleviate some of that pressure. Spending a lot more time on the basics can actually take some of the pressure off the more challenging topics. Okay, Corné also just mentioned lots of support that she's getting from heads of department and leadership of the school. So it's not necessarily that, but thank you for the mental boundary idea. It's a great point. Jill says, thank you. This has been very helpful. Should they listen to guided meditation an hour or so before the exam? Can they relax quickly or not? And so Ali, I'll hand over to you to expand on that.
Yeah, so I think that, maybe an hour is before the exam is maybe a bit too sort of far away. But yeah, I would say as close to the exam as possible, because if you do it, you might calm down, but then that anxiety and fear might start creeping in again. But as Ash had said, we want to try and get the baseline down. So it's something that the kids ideally should be doing all the time, regularly. I'm not going to go too much into it, but there's a nerve that runs in your body called the vagus nerve, which might be something you could read up on as educators. And that's what basically gets activated when you get anxious. And we can work on our vagal tone, which is that we do exercises like Ash referenced that can help your vagus nerve calm down more quickly. So it's both sort of long-term strategy and then something you can do in real time. But I would advise that you do those sort of in real time strategies closer to the time of the test. So ideally, just before the test starts.
Yeah, thank you.
I was going to give a little...
Yeah,
sorry. something to kind of add into that, because I think, yeah, like the guided meditation can take a long time, or you could do like a quick one. But an activity to kind of get them out of their heads might be a good idea. So for example, for 5 minutes before the exam, you get all of them up and you tell them to move like a specific thing. So move like a really old person, and they have to move around the class like a really old person, or move, move like a bunny, or move like someone who's angry, move like someone who's in a gang, right? So make it fun and get them to move around. It takes 5 minutes. They'll start laughing about it. And then they could sit down and just take a breath and get started. And maybe that's an idea that could help.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so helpful. I remember once a teacher, you know, having us sit in the classroom and stare at a clock on the wall and kind of breathe to, you know, till the hand moves to this point, breathe, you know, do specific breathing exercises just before a test. And it was super helpful. So that's just a nice quick one that I personally experienced, and it was great. Listen, ladies, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. It's been so valuable for the teachers. We're getting lovely comments in the chat. Thank you so much, educators, for joining. We value your input. So you'll see that I've put a feedback form in the chat. And if you do have any feedback to leave us, positive or negative, we'd love to know how you found the session, and any suggested topics or talking points that you'd like to hear on next time. And yeah, thank you so much again to Ali and Ashira. Really appreciate your time. And we will send you the recording of the session, everyone. Thanks so much and have a lovely day.